Oh, Nancy, you are muted. Still muted.
He's still muted.
Nancy, you're still muted.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm trying to block out background noise.
we got you now. You can go ahead, Nancy, if you'd like to.
Oh, okay, great. I thought Asher was going to start. Asher, you want to say something for a second?
I would just like to introduce our secretary on the executive committee, Nancy Welber-Barr, who really, is a longtime board member, really was the brainchild behind bringing the Civility Project to JCRC AJC. So it's really my delight to have Nancy introduce this program.
Thank you, Asher. And if anyone is new to the JCRC AJC, Asher Lopatin is our executive director, Rabbi Asher Lopatin. We're thrilled to have him. So thank you. Yes, I actually was able to see the Civility Project for myself a year ago at the Mackinac Conference up on Mackinac Island with Nolan and Stephen, and saw a couple of different sessions and was really impressed with what they're doing. And I thought it was a perfect fit for what we are trying to achieve at the JCRC AJC, which is civil discussion among people who have differing views. So the opportunity presented itself, and I'm really pleased this evening that we have Nolan Finley, who I believe is the chief of the head of the editorial board of the Detroit News. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Henderson, who is the host of Detroit Today on WDET at 9 a.m. in the morning, among other things that he does. So, so I welcome you both. And before we get to Nolan and Stephen, I'd like to introduce Lynn Gladner, who is the executive director of the Civility Project. And she's also a marketing consultant. She's an author, and she's the host of the Make Meaning podcast and the owner of the company Your People LLC. So Lynn, take it away.
Thank you. So I'm really honored to work with Nolan and Stephen. And what we'll do tonight, I'll just give you guys a little bit of an overview and then we'll jump in. We will start by introducing the Civility Project and how we build civility. And then you guys are going to have an opportunity in breakout groups of 4 or 5 people to have some small discussions and actually put what you're learning tonight to work. All the while, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will address them as you ask them. And at the end of the night, we'll ask you to answer a couple of quick questions for JCRC AJC before we sign off. And we will also invite everybody, if you'd like to participate in our monthly newsletter, we send out tips for continuing to build civility in your lives. So I'd like to first just do a quick little video from our sponsor. We're so grateful to Delta Dental for making this possible, free to hosting organizations and free to all of you. And so just let's give them 30 seconds to give them our gratitude.
We are living in challenging times. Politics is polarizing. Racism is rampant. The pandemic is frightening, and families are divided. Tough times require more dialogue and more understanding. But navigating our differences constructively is hard work. Delta Dental believes that healthy, smart, vibrant communities are also civil and harmonious. They are places where disagreement does not have to be toxic or destructive. Civility starts with listening. Welcome to the Civility Project.
So again, thank you for joining us tonight. I would like to begin by asking Stephen and Nolan to introduce the Civility Project, tell us a little bit about how it came to be, and then we'll get into how we build civility.
You want me to start?
Sure.
Okay. So the Civility Project, I think, is probably best understood as an effort by me and by Nolan to take what we've learned over the last 12 or 13 years in both a professional and personal relationship, and try to share that with other people, with the hope that they might be able to do the same kind of thing. For those of you who may not know about us or our work, Nolan and I sit on very opposite sides of almost every political issue you could think of. He's a conservative. I'm a liberal. We just don't see things the same way in almost any circumstance. And when I came back to Detroit in 2007 from living and working on the East Coast for a while, I came back as the editorial page editor at the Free Press, which is the liberal newspaper in town. He was then, as he is now, the editorial page editor of the conservative Detroit News, and there was kind of a natural working kind of partnership where people would put us on television or radio or on panels, and look forward to us having debates, having arguments. And we did that. I mean, we did that and still do that, in fact, quite frequently. But over time, I think we both learned that that there was more to each of us than the things that we disagreed about, and that despite those disagreements, we actually liked each other, and actually were able to become friends despite the really profound disagreements that we have. Over the last 5 years, of course, we've watched as the world around us really has pulled back from those kinds of spaces where the bitterness of the political divides that exist, the bitterness of the discussions and debates and arguments have made people reluctant, if not absolutely unwilling to engage in that way with people they disagree with, let alone have some sort of personal relationship with them. And so we really came to the point where it seemed as though the thing that we were doing was of even greater use, or of greater potential use to people. Learning how to talk with one another, learning how to argue with one another, learning how to disagree without getting to the point of being really bitterly disagreeable. And look around. 2020 has, if it were possible, kicked all of that into even higher gear, to the point where I think people are doing and saying things that we haven't really seen a lot of people do before, and the ability to actually sit down and talk about the things that divide us seems in rarer and rarer space. It just seems almost impossible to find it. And so the Civility Project grew up a few years ago out of our desire to say, let's hold on a second. There are ways to do this without fighting, without demeaning people, and there are ways to do this and maintain healthy personal relationships. There's a way to do this without devolving into hatred and dismissal and withdrawal. And so that's what we've been doing, and that's what we've been bringing to groups like yours for a couple of years now.
Yeah, I think that sums it up nicely. I would add that our goal is not to end disagreements. It's not to end necessarily division. We're always going to have disagreements, and we're always going to be divided at some level on many different issues. our goal is to teach people, show people through our own experience that you don't have to hate each other because you hold different political viewpoints. You don't have to hate each other because you belong to different political parties. You don't have to hate each other because you hold different political views. You can find enrichment and stimulation in your divisions, in your disagreements. And you can build friendships with people you might never have thought you could build friendships with before. And, we think that this is important. We look at, read a poll before the election, some 52% of people said they didn't know anybody who was going to vote for a person different than they were going to vote for. I don't think that's healthy, and it's not conducive for us talking through our issues. And so we're glad to be here with you all. And I know this is a very civil group, but hopefully you can gain something from this discussion, and we will as well in talking with you. So thank you for having us.
So let's begin before we go into our first breakout session, just sort of laying the groundwork. Stephen and Nolan, you have talked a lot about how we go about building civility, and maybe you could start by just laying out a few of those steps that people can employ in their lives and their relationships toward having more civil conversations and relationships.
I'll start with that. I think this whole thing starts with respect. You can't build civility until you gain a measure of respect. Trust, just as important, maybe the same thing. And we start all of our programs talking about trust and respect and getting to know each other as people, as individuals, before we start scrapping about politics. And we've got a little exercise we have people do to try to build trust and respect. We ask people of different viewpoints, individuals of different viewpoints, to sit on together one-on-one and talk about the things that shape them in terms of their political views. What makes you a conservative? What makes you a Republican? We went through this exercise. I'm sure Steve will tell you about a few years ago over StoryCorps. But just sitting down and figuring out who that person is beyond their politics. And, our contention is that most good people, and we believe most people are good, that most people come to their viewpoints the same way. They take the facts, they take the figures, they take the information that's available, they apply their own values and experiences and come up with a viewpoint. If their viewpoint is different than yours, it doesn't make them evil, doesn't make them stupid, doesn't mean they have some sinister motivation. And so when you understand that, you could take the anger down just a little bit. You can take the suspicion down a little bit, and you can start having productive discussions, meaningful discussions that may never lead to agreement, but it may lead to an important friendship in your lives.
Yeah. Nolan mentioned the exercise that he and I did together a few years ago. This was when the NPR project called StoryCorps came to Detroit. And StoryCorps, for those who are unfamiliar, is a project aimed at trying to collect American stories about relationships. They go city to city in a little Winnebago, and they get people to come in with somebody who's important to them and talk about the relationship between the two people. When they came to Detroit, I took Nolan down with me, and I said we should sit in that Winnebago and talk not about the things that we normally talk about, not about the things that divide us or have an argument. We should talk about where our ideas come from, why we think the things that we do, and we did this after. We'd already been working together and had become friends for about a decade before we went and did this. But, I think both of us would say that we learned things about the other that we didn't know before we did that. And I think we understood more about where the other person was coming from in the arguments that we have. For having had that discussion. And so that became a real key pillar of the Civility Project, is the ask of people who are participating in this with us to do that with somebody. Do that with somebody who you disagree with. Go and have a conversation, not about what you disagree about, but where it comes from. We also talk about some other really important keys to civility, like listening, the idea of actually listening to somebody as opposed to just not talking when they're talking. The idea of active listening, really trying to figure out what somebody is saying, why they're saying it, and being able to, even if you don't agree, to relate to what they're saying and where they're coming from. And the idea of committing to the dialogue over a long period of time. So often right now, the convenient thing to do, or the cool thing to do, really, is to walk away from a disagreement you have with somebody and say, I'm not talking to that person anymore, and I've blocked that person on social media. I don't even see that person on social media anymore. Those are instincts that I think really undermine the idea of being able to have a civil dialogue with somebody, and they lead to some of the things that we're seeing right now in terms of the way people are interacting. And so all of those things go into this idea of building a space and a relationship where you can have really strong disagreement. And I really want to stress that, if you've seen Nolan and I have an argument, that that this is not about pulling punches. This is not about just trying to get along. I mean, we really disagree, and oftentimes there's a lot of passion in that disagreement, and sometimes there's even anger in that disagreement, and that's actually okay, because we have created a space where both of us can express those things and not fear that it's damaging the relationship, because we know that the relationship is about more than those disagreements, and that each of us respects the other for being more than the sum of the political views that they have. So if you can create those spaces, if you can work on creating those spaces, I think the idea of being able to have civil exchanges with people you don't agree with, becomes possible.
So before we jump into breakout rooms, which we'll do in a minute, and I will give you guys the question to talk about, we have a question from Aura, and she said, Stephen and Nolan, this is a very important session. Thank you for teaching us about the importance of civility. How often do you actually change one another's views on a topic?
Never.
Never.
Never. And that's not the goal. That's an important question, I think, because too many people enter these conversations with someone who's opposite of them in terms of their politics, with this goal of conversion. I mean, you're like Christian missionaries or something. You come in here and say, I got to convert. I've got to change your mind. I'm not going to fulfill myself as a person unless I make you think like me. If you're going into the conversation to convert, to change minds, to change views, forget about it. It's not going to happen. I'm never going to make him see the light. But it doesn't mean that there's not value in the conversation. We set an honest goal for our conversations a long time ago. It's not to change or convert, and it's not to win. It's not, oh man, I got to score a point on Steve. I've got to look better than Steve on TV. And that's not what it's about. You're out there to try to engage, to learn, and to learn from each other. And in the process of learning, might not change your views, but it may help prove your views to yourself, or to sort of refine them. And that often happens for me in our conversations, to learn something. Early on, when I first started reading Steve, when he first came to the Free Press, I hadn't really met him much yet, or didn't know him much, but I read his work and I thought, wow, I don't really agree with his positions. They're different than my positions, but damn, I mean, they're presented well. I appreciate the eloquence of his arguments. I appreciate the writing. And oh, by the way, it helps me go back and sharpen my arguments because that's what I'm up against. And that should be your goal going in. Don't worry about changing. We've got so many people who go through the holidays. Oh, I can't eat with my brother-in-law because he's such a jerk. And, you know, when you get down to it, it turns out what they're trying to do is change their brother-in-law, change his views, listen to each other, talk to each other, find a minute or two to laugh during the course of a discussion. I mean, there's a world of people out there who have value they could add to your lives if you just don't cut them off because they don't think like you.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the things that's true about, you know, people who have really different views, especially of politics and ideology, is I think we all think we know what the other side really believes. Like, we think we understand what's wrong with them, why they don't get it. But we don't know as much as we think we do about how that person came to those points of view. We don't know as much as we probably should about, you know, the building blocks of the arguments on that other side. And I've always really, you know, as somebody who spent 25 years in opinion journalism, you know, I always really valued understanding, really understanding the arguments on the other side. And you can only do that if you are really interacting with somebody who holds those views. I mean, somebody who can really articulate it because they believe it, and articulate it from a position of knowledge. And I think that is one of the real goals of this is again, understanding that the other side is not, you know, simplistic. The other side is not, you know, whatever stereotypical word you want to use to describe them. That there is nuance, that there is depth on the other side, and it's worth knowing, if for no other reason than to better understand your own arguments and how they differ from that.
And if I could
Oh.
just add, it's very important to see people on the other side of the political chasm as valid human beings. Because when we get to the point of becoming so hateful of the way they view, it's easy to, way they think, I mean, it's easy to dehumanize them. And that leads to some very ugly things in our history. So, you know, it's important to remember they're just as valid as you are, and their opinions to them are just as valid as yours are to you. And, you know, we are reaching that point, I think, in the country where we're demonizing each other, and you can never predict where that's going to go, or you can perhaps.
So we're going to go into breakout rooms in a minute. And the question that I'd like everybody to discuss is what motivates your political position. So in terms of what, where you are politically, what is important to you? What's motivating that? What's behind it? And I'd love for everybody to have a chance to speak in the group. You'll have about 7 minutes. You'll say at the end that it wasn't enough, and we understand. So the second round, you'll have 10 minutes. And Jonathan, I do see your question. We will get to the second part of it when we come back. So I will post the question as soon as you guys are in your groups. So you'll have it come to you, and then it'll tell you when you have about a minute left. Have a wonderful time. So if you're still here, you might want to go into your breakout room. You can just sort of click into that, and that would be wonderful.
Hello?
Hi, I just put you in a breakout room, so you should pop in and join the conversation.
Okay, join.
Yes. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Mom. You're muted, Linda.
Welcome back, everybody. We'll let everyone get back into the room. It's like time travel when you come back in a Zoom.
You were right, Lynn. Not enough time.
Was I right? I know. So the
You're
next one's 10 minutes, I promise. And you'll be in the same groups, which will be great. So welcome back. So we talked a little bit about what motivates your political position. So wherever you stand, what is driving that decision? And I would love to hear, as soon as we get everybody back in, I think we just have a couple people straggling in. We're going to talk about, how did that discussion go? And what, if anybody would like to share how the conversation in their group went, or if you discovered anything in the process, we would love to hear from you. And you can just jump in if you'd like to, or you could raise your hand, and if I can see it. Lauren?
I'd say that in our group, kind of how we were raised, definitely was brought into how we came to our viewpoints. The communities in which we were raised and our parents, and also things that happen to you throughout your life. Whether it was a loss or, something with your career, I think every single little thing is going to obviously change how you view anything.
Thank you. Who else would like to share what happened in their group or what they discovered? Lori? You have to unmute though.
I'm
There
not
you
used
go.
to the unmuting part. Jeff keeps trying to mute me here for real life, but it doesn't work. It was very good because one of the people I was in the group with, I knew, but we had never discussed anything politically. And the other is somebody who at the age of 6 came from the former Soviet Union, from Moscow, but attended Hillel Day School. So I think, like the last young woman who spoke, I think that the idea of our own life circumstances seem to affect our politics. But like Harold pointed out in our group, it's the Jewish values, it's the idea of social values, so the idea that we want to keep our world safe. But it was interesting because Danya was saying that sometimes it's hard to say everybody has a place on the spectrum, because sometimes there are some things that are so not just inappropriate, but dangerous or wrong. And the question is, how do you get involved in that kind of conversation?
Thank you, Lori. Who else would like to share something about their experience or how their conversation went? Anybody? We'd love to hear from you.
Another interesting thing that came up in our group, I was in the same group with Lori, is that being Jewish, Israel is a priority for us, but how when you have an administration which on one hand does things that are pro-Israel, but on the other hand gives such a rise in anti-Semitism and hate crimes, it's not an easy decision. It's not like a clear-cut decision just because you're Jewish, you're going to vote one way or another.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point.
Similar to that, it came up that sometimes, what do you do when your morals conflict with your what you think the Jewish tradition is saying, and how you deal with that and how you make choices in that case. So that's a similar kind of point. People were all over. I don't think people gave up on their morals, but how much their Judaism motivated them and how much their morals or life experiences motivated them differed, I think, amongst us.
That's a really good point, Asher, because, and Stephen and Nolan, I'd love to hear from you both on this. I know that being part of the Jewish community, we all sort of share values and perspectives, but can be voting on different ends of the spectrum from that same perspective. And Stephen and Nolan, you've talked about this before, about how everybody sort of wants the same thing, but they may vote in a different direction. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit for us.
Well, sure. I mean, that's our one of our basic point is, we all agree, many of us, and particularly Steve and I, speaking for us, we usually agree on where we want to get, what the goal is. It's the process of getting there we disagree with. Once you understand that, it makes the work of getting there a lot more productive, because you're going to try to get to the same place. We want, better homes, better lives, better homes, better country for our children, for ourselves. And, there's a lot of different ways of getting there. But we need to keep heading in that direction together.
Yeah. One of the, it's interesting to think about, the power of religion and religious belief to help you see past other differences, right? If you're Jewish and somebody else is Jewish, you've got some common values, you've got some common beliefs, and even if you sit on opposite sides of the political spectrum, that common belief is an opportunity to see that other person as more than that ideological belief. And I'm not sure I've thought a whole lot about, about how powerful that could be, because it hasn't really come up in a lot of the sessions that we're talking about. But it is one of the things that could be, a doorway to this kind of exchange. I'm not Jewish. I'm Catholic, but I always say we're all motivated by guilt. It's just, who are we guilty about? But it's the same thing. Catholics have an enormous range, a wide range of political opinions, and the church itself, and the church's teachings and the beliefs are probably more of an opportunity than we even take advantage of, to be able to see past those differences.
It's interesting. There was a recent podcast by the Shalom Hartman Institute about how there's no such thing as like a Jewish voting bloc. And I would think you'd probably say the same thing in the Catholic Church, that there are, Jewish people, but you might choose one issue within the Jewish tradition or another that is your foremost issue when it comes to voting. And that is actually a fantastic segue into our second breakout room, because what we want to do is build on our earlier conversation and talk now about what things in your background, in your value system, bring you to your political position. So getting specific about your background and your values, what then influences your politics from that perspective. So I'm going to pop you guys back into the breakout room. You will have 10 minutes this time, and it still won't be enough, I promise, but make sure everybody gets to chat a little, and then we will come back in and we will be answering questions. So here we go. So do I need to pop you guys into a room? Welcome back.
Thank you. Lynn, if you can call on Alan Baum when we come back, he had some
Yeah.
good things.
Okay, great. Will do. I feel like it's time travel when we go in and out of breakout rooms, you know? Maybe I've been reading too much Outlander. I don't know.
Love it.
We'll have to talk.
We really do.
Outlander, did I hear Outlander?
You did. I'm a little obsessed.
Oh, Randy, we have so many discussions we need to have.
Oh, books or the show? Okay,
Yes.
either.
Both.
My sister got me. Oh, well, we'll have to talk about the cruise, the author cruise.
I've gotten my mother into it.
Okay, we have
Me
a new
too.
little
Me too.
group. Oh my goodness.
So welcome back,
you have to
everybody.
Now you have to do the audiobook. See, if you think the show was good, the audiobook is outstanding.
Ooh, interesting.
So welcome back. So we'd love to hear how this round went, how the conversations continued. So Nolan, you had mentioned Alan Baum, you thought wanted to offer some thoughts.
Yes.
Is that right? Alan,
Yeah.
would you mind sharing with us what your insights were?
It's probably muted.
There we go.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about, I have a particular friend that I worked with professionally, and since he's retired, and now we don't have to worry about offending each other because we're working together in a professional way. So we connected on Facebook, and the comment I made that Nolan thought that was valuable was talking about, obviously we connected, as I say, through Facebook. That obviously has its shortcomings, but the comment I made is about the pithiness of it, that it rewards, it doesn't really allow for real full communication, and if the comments, as I say, become pithy, then they lose some of their depth and increase the potential for misunderstanding.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, Alan. And I think we'll get into social media in a few minutes as well, because that's definitely a part of these conversations. Thank you for bringing that up. Who else would like to share what happened in your group the second time around? Lori?
Well, we lost one and we gained a different person, which was a very interesting, because Linda brought to our group some new understanding. Some of it had to do with how people in certain countries, the idea that if you're an American, what right do you have to offer an outstanding view about Israeli politics? And then the opposite is, what right do Israelis have to tell us how to vote here in America, because they're not on the ground. So that was one of our conversations, and the idea of, we kind of got into the idea of immigration, because Jenya, again, stands very strong with that. But racism, we still feel is a very overcoming issue. This idea of judging a book by its cover, or literally discriminating against people because they don't fit in.
Really good points. Thank you, Lori. Who else wanted to share what happened in their group? Randy?
There was a bit of a discussion, actually an observation in our group, that over the years, things have gotten more and more divisive. So back when you were discussing how, your politics or values, whatever, shaped you growing up through family, no matter really how old you are, it's kind of where it all starts, around the holiday table, the family table, is that no matter what party you were from, there wasn't this divisiveness or disgust. It was, everybody was either you were close to the center, you were here. And over the last 4 years or what have you, there's such extremes that have gotten so hateful that it's even more difficult to have those conversations. And then the second time when we were thrown in the room together, we came to a point where that's because they're even more important now, because if we don't, what kind of world are we really leaving? And that possibly we can do this. This is like 101. And I think a lot of the people in this group possibly are ready for like 201, you know, Civility Project, you know, really to be able to dive deep. You know, what do you do when you're talking and you really want to listen to that person? Do you nod? If you nod, then are you agreeing with what they're saying or not? How do you actually respond where you're showing that you are listening? And how do you let them know that, no, your nodding is not in agreement?
Here's what I do.
Trying to be polite.
Randy, here's what I do with Steve.
Okay, well, I'm an eye roller too, and I've got to learn not to do that.
Yeah, if you're talking to somebody and they're going, you know it's headed south, though.
I try not to do that with my teenagers, but I'm not successful. So, yeah. So that's a really good point.
That's a really great question about how to show that you're listening. You know, I talk a lot about how you know that you're listening, and how you can demonstrate that you're listening. I have two little kind of cheats that I use to make sure that I am actually listening to someone who's talking and not kind of stuck in my own head about what I might want to say when they're done. You know, one is being able to repeat back what the other person said and be able to repeat it back, you know, accurately and warmly, even if you really disagree with what they said. Being able to make the same argument that they were making and understand, you know, where it's coming from, is a good way to check yourself, you know, to make sure that you're listening. The other way that I do that is by you know, is by checking to see if I have questions about what the other person is saying, like genuine questions. You know, being curious about what somebody else is saying and where it's coming from, you know, is another way to really demonstrate that you are listening. And it's not necessarily that you're agreeing. You might be asking questions that suggest you don't agree. But the question itself adds to a validity of the exchange that I think is really important. And so those are ways that I think you can signal that you're listening without giving in and making it seem like you agree.
So I want to go back. Jonathan has been waiting so patiently for us to answer the second part of his question since before the breakout room. So I want to get to that. And I know Susan has a question as well. And I do encourage all of you to add your questions to the chat. We have about a half hour left, so I want to make sure we do get to what you're looking for. So Jonathan said, you know, we talked about how it's not the goal to change people's perspectives. So he said one of the core values of JCRC AJC is more than just understanding one another, but about building bridges. And he would like to hear your thoughts about how we can accomplish that.
Well, you know, I believe a non-judgmental, civil, productive conversation is the first step. You know, getting to know another person, finding out what you have in common. And that was one of the first things Steve did. You might look at us sitting next to each other and say, well, those two dudes have nothing in common. And, you know, it's right. We come from different backgrounds, different races, raised somewhat differently, took different paths to get to where we are professionally. Even we ended up in the same profession. But, you know, we moved past early this singular focus on political views and worked to enjoy each other's company. I mean, we drank a lot together. We both are Bourbon aficionados, and maybe that was the key. I don't know, but there were many, many things that we enjoyed talking about when we weren't arguing over politics. And I think that's the key to building a bridge, is quit focusing so much on your differences and find the commonalities.
So, and also people usually ask when you mention bourbon if you have a favorite. So let's get that out of the way. Any recommendations here really quickly?
You know, I whatever I'm drinking at the moment is usually my favorite, but if somebody was looking to give me a Christmas present,
Sorry, go ahead.
that's
You're
all
saying?
right. If somebody's looking to get me a Christmas present and can find Blanton's, I'll take that every day. You know, and you know, I think that's a more expensive bourbon. Woodford Reserve probably is my favorite everyday bourbon.
Yeah,
Stephen, anything quickly?
my everyday bourbon is Jefferson's, which I just always have in the house and can drink straight. That's sort of my standard. If I can have it without a mixer, it's good bourbon. And then Basil Hayden is the other one that I really enjoy for the same reason.
So our next question is from Susan, and she says, are either one of you ever disappointed in each other? And if so, how do you demonstrate your disappointment?
All the time.
You know, that to be disappointed in someone, you have to have certain expectations of someone. And I don't have any expectations of Steve to conform to any of my beliefs. So, you know, I disagree with him a lot. And I think a lot of times I think, you know, but I don't know if I ever said, geez, I'm really disappointed in Steve. He's, you know, he doesn't go off the dock too much and too often, you know. And if he does, I just tell him. So, man, you might not want to say that.
You know, I think that's right, that it's not disappointment. There are times though when I think there are times when I think we might agree more on something than we do, and then sometimes that can lead to disappointment. Or maybe another way to put it is I might expect Nolan to be more exercised about something than he might be, and sometimes that might lead to disappointment. But I think he's right that neither one of us expects that the other is going to see things our way. This is just that's not what's going on here, and it's not what's going on for 13 years. So I don't think we have that expectation anymore.
So we have a question from Sherry, and she says, you have a long-standing relationship, so you can roll your eyes and be more expressive with each other. How does that work between people who disagree and don't know each other so well?
It doesn't. That's a good way to get your head knocked, I guess. You know, you got to go easy, you know, in the beginning. You got to sort of feel your way out. And again, don't singularly focus on your differences at first. Have a much broader conversation. Find those common points so you get to a comfort level and pick your spots. I mean, I sat down at a Lions game 3 or 4 years ago, a group of people, and a woman sat down next to me and said, you know, we're watching the game, and said, well, what about Trump and this? And what do you think about Trump? And I'm thinking, well, I don't think Trump can help these Lions one bit in this game, but you know, pick your spots, you know, pick a comfortable spot. We recommend people, you know, when they first start this exercise, to go to a coffee shop or something, sit or take a walk, which is a wonderful way to have a civil conversation, because you're not likely to, you know, stop and scream at each other. So, you know, be in the right place and the right frame of mind.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, anything to add, or should I go to the next question?
No, let's go to the next question.
All right. So Alan says, Stephen, you do these things very well on Detroit Today. Most of the callers are really great. Shout out to public radio audience, but you do a wonderful job when calls come in that are less than wonderful. So thank you for that comment. Jeannie asked, can you have a productive conversation with a bully? If so, how?
Wow.
Probably not.
Probably not. I mean, you know, I think we both are able to admit that this has its limits, right? There are some situations where it's not possible, and there are some people who aren't interested in this and are committed to, you know, a combative or otherwise destructive interaction. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that. It's okay to say, well, that's not somebody I can do that with. But I think it's also important to you know, to recognize that that's not most people. I really don't think most people fall into that category. I think most people believe what they believe, and they might believe it strongly, but they aren't ill-intentioned about it, and they aren't trying to browbeat somebody else into believing what they believe or bullying them into it. But when you find that, I think it's okay to say, well, this is not a situation where this can work.
And you can't like everybody. I mean, don't beat yourself up. You're not, you know, I'm not Gandhi, and there are people I just can't do this with. You know, I can't get, there's a former Republican state lawmaker, old guy I run into about once a year. And as soon as I do, we go at each other's throats like cur dogs, you know, saying the most awful things. It's just that chemistry, I guess. But, you know, we're saying we do the best we can with most people, but you're not going to be able to do this with everybody.
Sorry. So Susan asks, at what point in a discussion should you say we agree to disagree and end the discussion? When do you walk away?
Well, you never walk away for good, but there is a point in the conversation. Steve and I reach it frequently. We're one of the other one of us just say, well, and we move to another discussion. But you know, we never walk away for good.
But I think that's an important point to recognize too, is when the instant discussion you're having doesn't have any more productive use, right? That you've reached a point where it's impasse or there's just nothing more to be learned. It's okay to say, hey, we'll talk about this some other time or whatever, and walk away for then. You know, I also think it's okay to say, and I think this has been very true for a lot of people this year because of the things that have happened and how difficult they have been to process, let alone come up with what you think and argue about. It's okay to say, I'm not ready to talk about that right now. I'm not ready to have an argument or a debate about that issue because, you know, I'm still trying to figure out what I think about it. And I'm still trying to, you know, corral my emotions so that it doesn't overwhelm the way I think about it. It's okay to say, look, we can talk about this, but we can't talk about this now. That is civil as well, recognizing that and sort of pulling back and saying, well, we'll do that later.
And when you reach a difficult point in a conversation, you should find yourself saying, what do you think? What's your opinion? What's your view? Stop. Instead of preaching, start asking a few questions, and you can take things down a notch that way, because, you know, it opens the other person up and forces them to really think about what they're thinking rather than just about what they're saying. So, you know, ask a few questions when you get that point. You probably can keep things moving along more productively.
So, you know, Stephen, you just brought up something that I think is really important to address while we still have time is, you know, we started this whole thing with the Civility Project before the pandemic, knowing we were going into a potentially contentious political year of 2020. And we had no idea all the different things that would unfold and would make it hard to build civility. And so we've focused a lot in our sessions this year about how do we build civility in a time of crisis. So we've had the pandemic and lots of different people have been affected in many different ways. That has become politicized. We certainly had a quite a tumultuous presidential election year and really passionate politics. And we've had so much racial turmoil. So this year has just been a triple whammy and then some. So maybe could you speak a little bit about how we do build civility when we're in a time of crisis or three crises as we've had this year?
Add to that the isolation, Lynn, so that we're not having these conversations face to face. We're doing them in the worst possible way, as Mr. Baum talked about earlier, doing them on Facebook, doing them in little bites on Twitter, even email, the worst way to try to communicate and to try to work through a difficult issue or contentious conversation. Just not being able to sit down with, a drink and see each other's, look in each other's eyes and watch each other's body language it's been almost impossible to do this. And, that's what I think.
I think one of the things that, well, I think there are 2 points to make here. One is that, Nolan's absolutely right that it's harder to do it this way, but it's also more important to do it because of the urgency of the issues that we're talking about. I mean, all of these things are very important and have a profound effect on people's lives. This is exactly the moment that we need to be able to have these kinds of discussions without them devolving into destructive interactions. The thing that I have come to value a little more, I think, this year than other times because of all of this is the value of space. Taking the space for yourself to be able to think about these things, be able to feel the things that people are feeling, and giving that space to other people too. Recognizing that all of these things are hard on all of us. I mean, the pandemic, whether your chief experience here this last 12 months has been, a health-related experience, I mean, people that getting sick and dying, or whether your experience has been, tremendous loss in your life of the things that you count on, like your job, or people losing their homes and things like that. No matter what it is remarkably tragic, the things that people have experienced in the last 9 months. And I think there's a tendency to assume on all our parts that what we're experiencing is the worst of it, and it's the thing that deserves the most attention. And I don't think that's a productive argument to have. The truth is that everybody is losing something. Everybody is really experiencing a lot of loss, and giving people the space to show that you understand that and that you care that they're feeling the things that they are feeling is terribly important. This is not a great time to try to build civility because, again, like I said, I think people feel so deeply about all these things. They feel so passionately about them, and the experiences we're all having are so awful. It's more a lesson about why it's important to be building civility when there isn't a pandemic, when we aren't seeing massive protests in the streets about systemic racism and inequality, when we're not in the most absurd and ridiculous election aftermath in the history of the republic. I mean, these are tough times when you need civility to already be in place. It's really hard, I think, to build it while all this is going on.
But necessary.
Yeah, it is necessary. Yeah.
I also would love for you guys to touch on social media for a quick minute, because I think, it's come up a couple times already. I know you have shared and different perspectives about it, but its role in either building civility or breaking it down, and how we can approach it would be super helpful.
Well, I'm not very active on social media, and for a lot of different reasons. But I think, as I said just a minute ago, it's the absolute worst way to try to communicate, and it changes people and the nature of their relationships. for some reason, it brings out some of the worst qualities in people. It tears down the filters, makes them more assertive and much less polite and much less caring about other people's feelings and the impact of their words. You know, hopefully over time it'll level off, but right now I find very little value in it in terms of advancing the culture.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty toxic right now. At least the effect of it is very toxic, and you know there are some kind of baked in qualities of social media that make it really hard to have positive or productive outcomes. You know, the relative anonymity of it is difficult. It emboldens people for the wrong reasons. And emboldens people in the wrong behavior. You know, you also have this dynamic of, you know, the self-fulfilling kind of prophecy where you are, because it's the first medium of information where we choose all of the pieces of that information. You know, the tendency is to choose the pieces that you want and ignore the pieces that you don't. So it creates these very insular communities where people are not getting information that they don't agree with. And that's a pretty dangerous dynamic. And then you've got the idea of shutting people out and shutting people down, which social media makes very easy. And the culture of social media celebrates that. You know, it's a pretty, like I said, it's a pretty toxic additive to discussion. I am more optimistic about its future. I think if you look at the history of communicative tools in our country in particular, they all start out in these kind of absurd early versions where they're doing things that don't make a lot of sense, and they all evolve into pretty vital tools. I mean, if you go back to the beginnings of radio and television, you would have, you know, wanted to kill those off in their infancy because they were, you know, ridiculous contraptions that didn't add anything to the discourse. Now, of course, you wouldn't do without them. And I think social media will get there. We just got to live through this initial period of really crazy behavior. And of course, you know, it all is happening at the same time. You have these other crazy things happening, and social media just pours gasoline on that fire. It's hard to attach a lot of value to it, but it'll get there over time.
So I think there's one question I'd like to get to, and then we'll wrap up. So Jonathan asks if you have a success story where you've seen some productive result from your efforts. And Nolan, it made me think of the women on Mackinac Island. That story is always a favorite. Maybe you could share that.
Yeah, I'll tell a couple, you know, both on Mackinac Island that we've seen. One, when we put these people together, some were strangers, some were longtime friends, colleagues, and these two ladies who lived in the same neighborhood walked together every morning for years. And they knew one was Republican, one was Democrat. They knew they had that difference, but they avoided talking about it because they valued the friendship and they thought it would put it at risk. So we asked them to sit down and talk about it. They talked about those differences and the why, you know, as we said in the beginning, talking about what are the values and experiences that motivate your opinion, the way you vote. And they both walked away saying, it was not what we assumed. Their reasons for being with one party or another, not what we assumed. We had made assumptions, and in talking with each other and having this honest, simple discussion, we learned, you know, more about the person and don't have to walk around on eggshells anymore, afraid they might offend. I tell a story, the first time we were on Mackinac, Steve and I, it was for the Republican state convention. And you can imagine his reception there. But we were up sitting at a bar late at night, and we're talking to each other. I walked away, and these two ladies grabbed me, Republican ladies, and said, oh, how can you talk to that Steve Henderson? How can you be friends with him? He's so awful. We hate him. And I was like, how do you know you hate him? Have you ever talked to him? And they said, well, no. I said, well, there's an empty seat. Why don't you go up? I've got to walk away. Why don't you take my spot and just talk to him? This went on for 2 hours, and they walked away saying, oh, he's so wonderful. And, that sort of put the seed of this whole project. That's probably been 10, 12 years ago, but it put the seed of this project in my head that, we hate too quickly. And before we take the chance to know somebody, I get that all the time, emails. Oh, I hate you. Blah, blah, blah. And they don't know me. All they know is what I write and what my politics are. And how many times in our own situations do we hear somebody say something? Do we hear somebody express support for one candidate to the other and say, I just hate him. I don't want to be around him. And, we've had several stories like that.
All right, so before we fully wrap up, I'm going to ask you guys to do a favor for JCRC. I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and if you could put your answer in the chat, it'll be what's called a chat waterfall where we see it go really fast. But the first question is, what are you taking away from today's session? So whatever comes to mind, if you can put that in the chat, we would love it. What are you taking away from today's session? So just pop your answer in there. What are you taking away from today's session? And then I will give you the second question to answer in the chat as well. Awesome. Thank you so much, you guys.
Lynn, I'm not even good at all that, but it was, I would like to hear what Stephen and Nolan have to say about what is they think in the next year, how our world will come together.
Okay, Eleanor will answer that in 1 second. So thank you for answering that first question. And then the second question is, what would you tell others about today's session? So if you can put those thoughts into the chat, that'd be great. What would you tell others about today's session? And we would love to hear that too. So while people are answering that question, Stephen and Nolan, could you answer Eleanor's question, please?
I don't know that we'll come together, but we may. I mean, at some point, we've got to get tired of being this bitter and angry with each other. And we've got to sort of be motivated to find a better path. You just get tired of fighting. I see some hope. It's very limited in the fact that Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell know each other and have worked with each other and seem to like each other, which will take, I think, Chuck Schumer more out of the equation. I don't think any Republican's going to be able to get along with him. But if those two can get along for a year or a few months, they might get something done, and it might calm the waters a little bit.
Yeah, I'm trying to be really positive about 2021, and some ways could it be worse than 2020? It's the way to think of it. But then you say that, and then you're like, I better knock wood because something else will happen. I think it's going to be a hard year. We are in for a hard stretch, not just because of COVID and the continued struggles with that, which I think will be with us for a good part of 2021, even though we probably will turn the corner in that year and get control of it. But because of the other things that are really dividing us right now. I mean, this is a country on the brink. We take so much of that for granted in this country. But there's nothing about this republic that makes it inured to the things that destroy other republics on the planet. I mean, some of the things that have gone on this year are bringing us to the brink of ending the American experiment, which is really serious stuff. I'm hoping that that we get an opportunity to back away from some of that and start to try to tackle problems together. I thought the virus was an opportunity for that. You know, when it struck in the spring, I thought maybe that would be the thing that got people doing that. Of course, it was just another reason to fight in the end. But yeah, I wish I were more optimistic about it, but I'm not.
Thank you, both of you. Before I hand things back over to Nancy, we do want to thank JCRC, AJC, and let everybody know that we are booking civility sessions for 2021. We're actually booked for January and February, but we're booking beyond that right now. So if you'd like to bring this to your workplace, your community, your group, please let me know. I put my email and the website in the chat. It's greatlakeCivilityProject.com. And we would love to bring this to you guys. So Nancy, I'd love to hand this over to you to finish us off.
Well, thank you, Lynn, and thank you again, Stephen and Nolan, for joining us this evening. We really appreciate this. Again, you know, this civility is a core value at the JCRC, AJC. And I really appreciate all of you who participated, especially many of you who may not regularly participate with JCRC, AJC. Please follow us on Facebook, and I think we might even be on Twitter. And generally, you know, go to our website and please join us again for other programs, because we have a whole panoply of things to choose from, all on Zoom.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.